The afternoon sun hung high over the Pacific Ocean, turning the water into a sheet of dancing diamonds. Jake Foster stood on the deck of his research vessel, one hand shielding his eyes from the glare while the other held a tablet displaying marine sensor readings. It was supposed to be a routine day. Just another Tuesday collecting data on ocean temperatures and tracking migration patterns of local fish populations. The kind of work that paid the bills and kept him out on the water where he belonged. Then the sky screamed. Jake's head snapped up at the sound. It was like nothing he'd ever heard before. Metal tearing, air burning, something fundamentally wrong happening above him. A black shape punched through the clouds, trailing thick columns of smoke and flames that licked at its hull. The object was massive, easily the size of a city bus, and it was falling straight down like a stone dropped from heaven. The spacecraft hit the ocean 300 yards from Jake's position with a thunderous impact that sent a wall of water shooting 50 feet into the air. The shockwave rocked his vessel so hard he had to grab the railing to keep from falling. His coffee mug slid across the deck and shattered. His equipment beeped frantically as sensors went haywire from the disturbance. For maybe 3 seconds Jake stood frozen. His brain tried to process what he'd just witnessed. Spacecraft. Actual spacecraft. Not a plane. Not a meteor. Something that had engines and purpose and came from somewhere that wasn't Earth. Then his training kicked in. Someone was in that wreckage. Someone needed help. Jake didn't waste time radioing for assistance. He knew how long it would take for Coast Guard to arrive. He knew that in cold ocean water minutes mattered. He kicked off his shoes and ran to the equipment locker, yanking out his diving gear with shaking hands. Tank, regulator, mask, fins. He checked the air gauge out of habit even though his mind was racing. Full tank. Good. He pulled the gear on faster than he ever had before, not bothering with his wetsuit. No time. He hit the button to lower his small inflatable dinghy, then climbed over the rail and jumped feet first into the Pacific. The water was colder than he expected. It drove the air from his lungs in a gasp. But Jake pushed through the shock and started swimming hard toward the impact site. Debris was everywhere now. Pieces of twisted metal floated on the surface. Some kind of fluid leaked from the wreckage, creating swirling rainbow patterns in the water that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. The smell was strange too. Like burning plastic mixed with something chemical and sharp. Jake took a deep breath from his regulator and dove. Underwater the scene was even worse. The spacecraft had broken apart on impact. Large chunks of hull material tumbled through the water column, sinking toward the ocean floor far below. Smaller pieces drifted in the currents. Jake's visibility was maybe 20 feet through all the disturbed sediment and leaking fluids. Then he saw movement. At first, Jake thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. But no, there was definitely something alive down there. Something big. He kicked harder, pushing through the debris field. The creature came into full view and Jake's mind went blank with shock. It looked like a leopard. That was the only comparison his brain could make. But this was no Earth animal. It was larger, maybe the size of a full-grown tiger. Its fur was covered in spots that glowed with a soft blue-green light, pulsing weakly like a dying heartbeat. The eyes were what really got him though. Crystalline blue, faceted like gemstones, filled with unmistakable terror and intelligence. The alien was drowning. It wore some kind of suit, probably a space suit, but the impact had damaged it badly. Cables and straps had tangled around its body, connecting it to a large piece of wreckage that was pulling it down like an anchor. The creature thrashed weakly, its movements growing more desperate and uncoordinated as its oxygen ran out. Jake didn't hesitate. He pulled his diving knife from its sheath on his leg and swam directly toward the alien. Those crystalline eyes locked onto him. Jake saw the fear spike in them. The creature probably thought he was another threat. But it was too weak to fight him off. Jake grabbed onto the tangled cables and started sawing. The material was tough, nothing like rope or cord. It had a synthetic feel, smooth and resistant to his blade. His lungs began to burn. He'd been under for almost a minute already. The alien's struggles were getting weaker. Its glowing spots flickered irregularly now. He sawed faster, putting all his strength into each stroke. One cable parted. Then another. The wreckage shifted, and for a horrible moment Jake thought it might drag them both down. But he kept cutting. His knife bit through a third cable, then a fourth. With one final desperate cut, the last restraint separated. The alien was free. Jake grabbed the creature around its midsection and kicked hard for the surface. It was heavy, so heavy. The suit added extra weight, and the alien itself was pure muscle under that glowing fur. Jake's legs burned with effort. His lungs screamed for air. The surface seemed impossibly far away. But he kept kicking. One stroke. Then another. The light above grew brighter. They broke through the waves together in an explosion of spray and gasps. Jake sucked in air, his regulator forgotten as he struggled to keep both their heads above water. The alien wasn't moving. Its eyes were closed. Those bioluminescent spots had gone dark completely. Jake hooked one arm around the creature and swam sideways toward his boat, using a modified sidestroke he'd learned in lifeguard training years ago. Every few seconds he had to stop and tread water to keep them both afloat. His muscles shook with exhaustion. Salt water stung his eyes and filled his mouth. Finally, after what felt like an hour but was probably only 2 minutes, Jake reached his vessel. He grabbed the ladder with one hand while holding the alien with the other. Getting a 200-pound unconscious alien up a boat ladder turned out to be the hardest thing Jake had ever attempted. He had to wrap a rope around its torso and use his boat's small winch system to help haul it aboard. The alien collapsed on the deck with a wet thump. Jake climbed up after it, his arms trembling so badly he almost fell twice. The creature wasn't breathing. Jake dropped to his knees beside it. His first aid training ran through his head. Airway, breathing, circulation. Did aliens have the same biology? He had no idea. But doing something was better than doing nothing. He placed his hands on the alien's chest, right over where he thought the heart might be. The fur was surprisingly soft under his palms. He started compressions, counting out loud. 1, 2, 3, 4. 30 compressions, then checked for breathing. Nothing. Jake tilted the alien's head back, pinched its nose shut, and gave 2 rescue breaths into its mouth. The anatomy was close enough to human that it worked. He went back to compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. Come on, he thought desperately. Come on, breathe. 30 more compressions. 2 more breaths. Jake's arms burned. Sweat mixed with seawater on his face. Then the alien convulsed. Water erupted from its mouth in a violent rush. It rolled onto its side, coughing and gasping and making sounds that were half growl, half sob. Those crystalline eyes fluttered open, unfocused and dazed. Jake sat back on his heels, his whole body shaking with relief and exhaustion. The alien was alive. He'd actually done it. As the creature's breathing steadied into something more regular, Jake noticed something odd. Even in its weakened state, even barely conscious, the alien's paw was wrapped around something. A silver pod, about the size of a briefcase, pressed against its chest. Whatever was in that container, the alien had refused to let go of it even while drowning. Jake looked at the mysterious pod, then at the alien, then at the sky where the spacecraft had appeared. His routine Tuesday had just become anything but routine. Jake sat on an overturned equipment box, watching the alien creature breathe. An hour had passed since he'd dragged her from the ocean. An hour of sitting there with a towel pressed against a cut on his arm, his clothes still dripping seawater onto the deck, trying to wrap his head around what had just happened. The creature's spots had stopped flickering weakly. Now they pulsed with a steady, rhythmic glow that reminded Jake of a heartbeat made visible. Blue-green light traveled across her fur in waves, and he found himself almost hypnotized by the pattern. Those strange crystalline eyes opened slowly, focusing on him with an intelligence that made his breath catch. This wasn't just an animal. This was a person. An alien person, but a person nonetheless. The device attached to her damaged suit suddenly crackled and popped. Static filled the air for a moment, then a mechanical voice emerged, stilted and strange but understandable. "Thank you," it said. The words came out broken, like the translator was struggling to convert her language into English. "I am Kesra. Felidae Coalition." Jake leaned forward, his heart pounding. First contact. He was having first contact with an alien species on his fishing boat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. "Jake Foster," he managed to say. "Marine biologist. I study ocean life." He paused, then asked the question burning in his mind. "What happened up there? Why did you crash?" Kesra tried to sit up and immediately winced in pain. Her paw went to her side where the suit had torn. But even injured, even barely recovered from nearly drowning, the first thing she did was check that silver pod. Her paws moved over its surface, touching panels that lit up with alien symbols Jake couldn't read. He watched her face, or what he could read of an alien face, and saw pure relief wash over her features when the readings apparently showed what she needed to see. "Pursued," she said through the translator. The mechanical voice couldn't quite capture emotion, but Jake heard the exhaustion behind it anyway. "Hunted. They cannot have this." Jake looked at the pod. It was surprisingly plain for alien technology. Just smooth silver metal with some kind of display panel on top. No obvious seams or openings. "Have what?" he asked. "Cannot say." Kesra's paw remained protectively on the pod. "Must keep temperature stable." Pod fails, everything fails. The desperation in her translated voice was clear now, cutting through the mechanical flatness. Please. Cooling system damaged. Help repair. Jake stood up and moved closer, kneeling beside the pod. Now that he looked carefully, he could see scorch marks along one edge. Probably from the crash. There was a small panel that had been partially torn away, exposing internal components that glowed faintly red. Too hot. Whatever was inside needed to stay cool and the system was failing. Let me see what I can do, Jake said. He went to his workshop below deck, a cramped space filled with tools and spare parts for maintaining his boat and research equipment. His mind raced as he gathered what he might need. Cooling system. Basic thermodynamics were probably universal, right? Heat needed to be transferred away from the pod. He could work with that. Jake returned with an armful of tools, wire, and components from his boat's refrigeration unit. Kesra watched him with those crystalline eyes as he set everything down and really examined the damaged pod for the first time. The technology was far beyond anything he'd ever seen. The circuits were arranged in patterns that made no sense to his understanding of electronics. The materials felt wrong under his fingers, too smooth and too warm. But the basic principle of the cooling system was clear enough. Coolant flowed through channels, heat exchangers transferred thermal energy away, and the whole thing was supposed to maintain a specific temperature range. Right now it was failing. The internal temperature display showed red symbols that didn't need translation. Okay, Jake muttered to himself. I can jury-rig something. He started connecting wires from his refrigeration unit to the pod's cooling system, matching voltages as best he could guess. Kesra helped when she could, pointing to specific connection points and making sounds that the translator turned into simple directions. There. Not there. Yes. Careful. As they worked side by side, Kesra began to talk. Maybe she needed to explain. Maybe she was just grateful to be alive and wanted to share with the person who'd saved her. The words came haltingly through the damaged translator, sometimes clear and sometimes garbled with static. She was a courier. That was her job, her purpose. The Felidae Coalition had trusted her with something precious, something that couldn't fall into the wrong hands. She'd been carrying it across space, heading toward a secure location when the collective found her. The collective, Jake said, soldering a connection between two circuits. Who are they? Ruthless, Kesra replied. The mechanical voice somehow conveyed hatred. They control much of known space. Take what they want. Destroy what opposes them. She paused while Jake worked on a particularly delicate connection. They have chased me across 3 star systems. I thought I lost them near the asteroid fields of Proxima. I was wrong. Jake's hands paused in their work. 3 star systems. You've been running for how long? 2 of your months? Maybe more. Hard to track time in jump space. 2 months of being hunted across the galaxy. Jake tried to imagine that kind of fear, that kind of pressure. He went back to his soldering, connecting the last wire that would link his boat's cooling system to the alien pod. Why Earth? He asked. Of all the places in the galaxy, why crash here? Kesra's spots pulsed a bit brighter. Maybe it was alien laughter. Because nobody knows you exist. Your world is unregistered. No jump gates nearby. No galactic trade routes. Just a small blue planet orbiting an average star in an unremarkable spiral arm. She looked at him with those crystalline eyes. Perfect hiding place. Jake thought about that. Humanity was completely unknown to the wider galaxy. They were alone out here, isolated, with no idea that thousands of civilizations existed beyond their solar system. It was humbling and terrifying at the same time. He made the final connection and held his breath. The pod's display flickered, and the red symbols slowly began to turn blue. The cooling system was working. It wasn't pretty and it definitely wasn't up to alien standards, but it would hold. Temperature stabilizing, Kesra said with obvious relief. You have my gratitude, Jake Foster. Jake was about to respond when his radio crackled to life. The voice that came through belonged to Director Patricia Wells, his government contact. Jake had started reporting unusual findings to her department 3 years ago after he'd discovered some strange underwater sounds that turned out to be submarine tests. She told him to keep her number handy in case he ever found anything truly odd. This definitely qualified. Jake. Patricia's voice was urgent, professional, cutting through pleasantries. We're tracking 3 unidentified vessels entering Earth's orbit. Large. Moving in formation. They appeared 15 minutes ago and they're not responding to any communications. Pause. Jake, please tell me you're not involved in this. Jake looked at Kesra. He looked at the silver pod with its precious cargo that he still didn't understand. He looked at the makeshift repairs he'd just completed, connecting human technology to alien equipment. He thought about diving into that water without hesitation, about choosing to help before he knew what he was helping with. "Yeah," he said into the radio. "I think I am." Static crackled for a moment. Then Patricia's voice came back, harder now. "Then get to shore. Now. We're scrambling response teams, but you need to get away from whatever you're involved with." Jake looked out at the horizon. His boat was still miles from land. Even at full speed it would take hours to reach safety. And something told him that whatever was up in orbit wouldn't wait hours. "I don't think I can do that," he said quietly. Kesra reached out and touched his arm with her paw. Through the fur, he could feel the warmth of her body, the reality of her existence. "You should go," she said through the translator. "This is not your burden to carry. You saved my life. That is enough." Jake thought about that. He could lower his emergency raft, paddle away, and let whatever happened happen. Patricia would probably send a helicopter. He'd be safe on shore before nightfall, and he could watch whatever came next on the news like everyone else. But he looked at Kesra, injured and alone on his boat. He looked at that pod she'd refused to let go of even while drowning. And he thought about the fact that he'd already made his choice the moment he jumped into the water. "No," Jake said. "I'm staying. Whatever's in that pod, whatever you're protecting, you're not facing it alone." Kesra's crystalline eyes studied him for a long moment. Then her spots pulsed in that pattern that might have been alien laughter or alien tears or something humans didn't have words for yet. "Then we face it together," she said. "And may your gods be kinder than mine." The afternoon sky had darkened without Jake noticing. Gray clouds rolled in from the west, but that wasn't what caught his attention. 3 thunderous booms shook the air, one after another, rattling his boat's windows and sending ripples across the calm ocean surface. Jake grabbed his binoculars and looked up. His blood ran cold. 3 shapes were descending through the clouds. Ships. Massive ships that made aircraft carriers look like toys. Their hulls were dark, almost black, with surfaces that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Red lights pulsed along their edges in patterns that hurt to look at. They moved with unnatural grace, defying every law of physics Jake understood. No visible engines, no contrails, just silent, impossible descent through Earth's atmosphere. "They found us," Kesra said quietly. Her bioluminescent spots were flickering now, not with the steady rhythm Jake had gotten used to, but with rapid, panicked pulses. Her crystalline eyes were fixed on the ships above. "I did not think they could track me here. I was wrong." Jake lowered the binoculars. His hands were shaking. Those ships were real. This was really happening. Alien warships were entering Earth's atmosphere, and they were here because of what was on his boat. "Jake Foster," Kesra said, and something in her translated voice made him turn to look at her. "I must tell you what you protect. You deserve to know what you have chosen to stand beside." "I figured it was something important," Jake said. His throat felt dry. "More than important." Kesra moved closer to the silver pod, the one they'd spent the last hour repairing. Her paw rested on its smooth surface. "Everything. This is everything." She touched a panel Jake hadn't noticed before. The metal surface shimmered like water disturbed by a stone, and suddenly it wasn't metal anymore. It was transparent, like looking through the clearest glass Jake had ever seen. Inside the pod, suspended in glowing blue liquid that seemed to pulse with its own light, were 12 tiny forms. Jake leaned closer, his scientific mind trying to process what he was seeing. Embryos. They were embryos. But not human. Not anything he'd ever seen in any biology textbook or research paper. They were small, maybe 3 inches long each, curled in the fetal position that seemed to be universal across species. But their proportions were different. Their developing heads were larger, their limbs positioned at slightly wrong angles. Even in their early stage of development, Jake could see they were something ancient, something other. They had an otherworldly quality that made his skin prickle, but at the same time, there was something hauntingly familiar about them. "What are they?" Jake whispered. "These are the last genetic samples of the architects," Kesra said. Her paw remained on the pod, protective and reverent at the same time. "The precursor race who created jumpgate technology. They went extinct 3,000 years ago, but their DNA holds the key to faster-than-light travel." Jake couldn't look away from the embryos. They floated peacefully in their glowing liquid, unaware that entire fleets were hunting them across the galaxy. Kesra continued, and Jake heard the weight of history in her translated words. "Every spacefaring civilization in the galaxy depends on the jump gates the architects left behind. Thousands of gates connecting thousands of worlds. They built them long before my people reached the stars. Long before most species discovered fire. The architects spread them across the galaxy as a gift, and then they vanished. What happened to them? Jake asked. Nobody knows. They just disappeared. Some say they ascended to a higher plane of existence. Others believe they destroyed themselves in some great war. All that remains are their gates and their ruins. Kesra's spots pulsed sadly. And these 12 samples, preserved by the Felidae Coalition for 3,000 years. The last genetic record of the species that connected the galaxy. Jake's mind raced. Jump gates. Faster than light travel. He was looking at the key to technology that his entire species had only dreamed about. The ability to cross light years in moments instead of lifetimes. And these embryos, these impossibly precious lives, were the last link to the beings who'd figured it out. The collective wants to weaponize this genetic code, Kesra said. Her voice turned hard. They have scientists who believe they can decode the architect DNA. Use it to build new jump gates. Not for exploration or connection, but for control. Control? Jake looked up from the embryos. Imagine if one faction controlled where jump gates existed, Kesra explained. They could isolate entire worlds by refusing to build gates to them. They could demand tribute from civilizations that wanted to connect to the galactic community. They could cut off trade routes, starve planets into submission, create empires that span thousands of light years with themselves at the center. Jake felt the color drain from his face. He understood now. Really understood. This wasn't just about alien politics or distant conflicts. This was about the fundamental freedom of thousands of species across the galaxy. Trillions of lives that would be affected by who controlled this technology. You're telling me, Jake said slowly, his hands trembling as he gripped the side of the pod, that I'm holding the key to whether an entire galaxy stays free or falls under tyranny? Yes, Kesra said simply. The weight of it hit Jake like a physical blow. He thought he was just saving someone from drowning. He thought he was helping a refugee escape persecution. But this was bigger than he could have imagined. This was the kind of responsibility that nations went to war over. That changed the course of history. And it was sitting on his fishing boat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Jake's radio crackled to life. This time the voice wasn't Patricia from the government. This voice was different. Cold. Mechanical. It spoke English, but there was something fundamentally wrong about the pronunciation, like the speaker had learned the language but didn't understand the humanity behind it. Unregistered vessel, the voice said. We have located the Felidae courier and stolen cargo. Surrender them immediately. Comply and your planet will not be harmed. Your species will be allowed to continue its existence in ignorance. Refuse and we will take what we need by force. You have 5 minutes to respond. Jake looked at the radio. Then at the embryos floating peacefully in their pod. Then at Kesra, who watched him with those crystalline eyes that had seen things he couldn't imagine. Then at the horizon, where somewhere beyond his sight lay California and his sister's family and millions of people who had no idea their world had just changed forever. He thought about humanity's history. About every time his species had faced bullies and tyrants and people who demanded submission. Sometimes they'd lost. Sometimes they'd won. But there was one thing humans had proven over and over again throughout their bloody, complicated history. They didn't surrender. Not when it mattered. Not when freedom was on the line. Jake picked up the radio. His hand was steady now. The fear was still there, but it had transformed into something else. Something harder. No, he said into the radio. Just that one word, clear and firm. Silence crackled through the speaker. Then the cold voice returned, and this time there was something almost like surprise in its mechanical tone. You refuse? You are one primitive vessel with no weapons. You cannot possibly. I said no, Jake repeated. Whatever you want, you're not getting it. Not from me. Not today. Kesra's eyes widened. Her spots pulsed rapidly. Jake, they will destroy this vessel. They will kill us both and take the embryos from our bodies. They have the power to. Let them try, Jake said. He was still looking at the horizon, at the direction of home. I've spent my whole life studying the ocean. Learning about how life survives down there in the dark, under impossible pressure, facing predators bigger and stronger than them. You know what I learned? Kesra shook her head slowly. Life doesn't survive by giving up, Jake said. It survives by fighting. By adapting. By standing its ground even when the odds are impossible. He finally turned to look at her. You chose Earth as a hiding place because nobody knew we existed. Well, now they know. And they're about to learn what happens when you threaten a human's home. Above them, the 3 massive ships completed their descent, hovering in the sky like dark angels of destruction. But Jake Foster stood his ground on the deck of his research vessel, protecting 12 embryos that held the future of galactic freedom, and waited for the storm to break. Jake's radio exploded with noise. Multiple voices talking over each other, static bursts, emergency tones that he'd never heard before. Then Patricia's voice cut through everything else, sharp and commanding. "Jake, listen to me very carefully. Keep that pod safe. Protect it with everything you have. We're scrambling everything we've got." She paused, and when she spoke again there was something different in her tone. Something almost like pride. "And Jake? We're not as unprepared as the galaxy thinks we are." Before Jake could ask what she meant, the line went dead. He stared at the radio, confused. What did she mean by prepared? Earth didn't have space weapons. They barely had a functional space station. How could they possibly fight against ships that traveled between stars? Then the sky lit up. All across the horizon, things that Jake had always assumed were normal satellites suddenly came alive. Panels unfolded. Weapons emerged. What he'd thought were weather monitoring stations revealed themselves as something else entirely. Electromagnetic pulse platforms, hidden in plain sight for years, powered up with a hum that Jake felt in his chest even from miles away. "What is happening?" Kesra asked, her crystalline eyes wide with shock. Jake couldn't answer. He was watching something impossible unfold. Orbital platforms that shouldn't exist swiveled toward the collective ships. These weren't crude missiles or chemical rockets. These were railguns, kinetic weapons that used electromagnetic force to launch projectiles at impossible speeds. And Jake recognized the design from somewhere, from classified documents he'd accidentally seen during a government briefing years ago. They'd been reverse-engineered. Earth had been studying crashed alien technology for decades, maybe longer, and they'd been building defenses in secret. Waiting. Preparing for a day just like this. The lead collective vessel seemed to sense the danger. Its weapon systems charged with a sound like tearing metal. A beam of concentrated energy lanced down from the ship, striking the ocean 200 yards from Jake's boat. The water didn't just splash. It exploded. A geyser of superheated steam shot 100 feet into the air, and the shockwave rocked Jake's vessel so hard he had to grab the railing. That was a warning shot. The message was clear. Surrender or die. Then Earth answered, and Jake would remember this moment for the rest of his life. Every hidden weapon platform fired at once. Coordinated. Precise. Electromagnetic pulses washed over the three collective ships in waves of invisible energy. Jake saw the effect immediately. The shields around the alien vessels flickered like failing light bulbs, then died completely. The ships hung exposed in the sky, their dark hulls suddenly vulnerable. The railguns fired half a second later. Solid slugs of tungsten, accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, slammed into the collective ships. No explosions. No fire. Just kinetic energy released in devastating impacts that tore through alien armor like paper. One ship's entire port side crumpled inward. Another spun wildly as its stabilizers failed. The third tried to climb back toward space but couldn't gain altitude fast enough. Impossible. The cold mechanical voice from the collective commander shrieked through Jake's radio, all composure gone. "This world is unregistered. You are primitive. You should not have this technology." Jake allowed himself a grim smile. "Surprise?" he muttered. The sky filled with contrails. Human fighter jets, scrambled from bases across the Pacific, swarmed toward the collective vessels. Jake could see them through his binoculars, small and fast compared to the massive alien ships. They shouldn't have stood a chance. Their engines were conventional turbines, not whatever impossible physics the alien ships used. Their weapons were missiles and guns, not energy beams. But the human pilots flew like nothing the collective had ever seen. They came in at angles that should have been suicide runs. They performed maneuvers that pushed the limits of what their aircraft could handle, trading safety for unpredictability. One pilot actually flew his jet through the steam cloud from the collective's warning shot, using it as cover before launching missiles at point-blank range. Another squadron executed a coordinated corkscrew pattern that confused the alien targeting systems. The collective ships had superior technology, but they fought like they'd always fought. Predictable. Systematic. They assumed their targets would behave logically. Human pilots didn't fight logically. They fought creatively. Desperately. With the kind of wild innovation that came from knowing your home was on the line. Jake watched a fighter pilot deliberately enter a flat spin, something that would normally mean certain death, just to dodge an energy beam. The pilot recovered at the last possible second and put 3 missiles into the collective ship's exposed engine port. Your species is insane, Kesra said, but there was admiration in her translated voice. Yeah, Jake agreed. We get that a lot. But watching the battle wasn't enough. They had work to do. Jake rushed into his boat's small cabin with Kesra right behind him. The silver pod sat on his navigation table, still maintaining its precious cargo at the correct temperature. We need to transmit the data, Kesra said urgently. Now while the collective is distracted. If we can distribute the architect genetic sequence, they cannot control it. Cannot weaponize it. Jake looked at his satellite communications equipment. It was designed for sending weather data and research findings, not transmitting alien genetic codes that could change galactic history. Will this even work? It must, Kesra said. She placed her paw on the pod's interface panel. Show me your transmission systems. For the next 5 minutes, they worked in frantic coordination. Kesra explained what she needed, and Jake jury-rigged connections he'd never imagined making. Fiber optic cables linked to alien data ports. His satellite uplink connected to the pod's core systems. The technology was so incompatible it shouldn't have worked at all. But it did. Barely. The transmission began. Where is it going? Jake asked, watching data stream across his monitors at speeds that made his equipment smoke. Everywhere, Kesra replied. Her paws moved across the pod's controls, directing the flow of information. To 100 secure servers across your world. To my people's emergency beacons. To allies in the Galactic Council. To any faction that opposes the collective's tyranny. She looked at him with those crystalline eyes. Once this knowledge is distributed, no single faction can control it. The architect legacy becomes free for all species. The collective loses their monopoly before they ever gain it. Above them, the battle intensified. Jake heard explosions. Saw flashes of light through his cabin windows. One of the collective ships had broken through the defensive perimeter and was diving straight toward his position. Human interceptors chased it, but they were too far away. They wouldn't make it in time. Jake could see the ship's weapon charging. A port on its underside glowed with gathering energy, aimed directly at his boat. He didn't think. He threw himself over the pod, covering it with his body. If that beam hit, it would vaporize his vessel in seconds. But maybe, just maybe, his body would shield the pod long enough for the transmission to complete. Maybe Kesra could survive. Maybe the data would finish uploading. It was a stupid plan. A desperate plan. A human plan. The alien weapon reached full charge. Then the sky exploded. The collective ship disintegrated in a ball of superheated plasma. Not from missiles. Not from railguns. From something else entirely. Through the smoke and debris, Jake saw it emerge. A human stealth bomber, one of the experimental ones that officially didn't exist. Its weapons bay was open, and strange devices Jake didn't recognize glowed with residual heat. Plasma weapons. Humanity had developed plasma weapons and kept them secret. The bomber banked away, its job done. Pieces of the collective ship rained down into the ocean, already burning up from their own momentum. Jake's equipment beeped. He looked at the monitor, his heart pounding. Transmission complete, Kesra announced. Her voice carried wonder and relief and something that might have been joy. Jake Foster, your species just changed galactic history. The architect genetic sequence is now distributed across thousands of locations. The collective cannot suppress it. Cannot control it. The knowledge is free. Jake slumped against the navigation table, his whole body shaking with adrenaline crash. Through his window he could see the remaining collective ships retreating, limping back toward space with human fighters harrying them every meter of the way. They'd done it. Against impossible odds, against technology centuries ahead of their own, humanity had stood its ground and won. And Jake Foster, a marine biologist who just wanted to study fish migration patterns, had been right in the middle of it all. The battle was over by sunset. Jake watched from his deck as the last collective ship limped toward orbit, trailing debris and venting atmosphere. Human fighters escorted it all the way to the edge of space, making absolutely sure it kept going. The other collective vessels had already fled, their commanders no doubt trying to figure out how to explain to their superiors that they'd been defeated by a species nobody had ever heard of. Jake's boat was a mess. Scorch marks on the deck from falling debris. His equipment half-fried from the improvised data transmission. His coffee maker was somehow broken, which felt like the worst casualty of all. But they were alive. The pod was safe. And according to Kesra, they'd actually won. Within the hour, military helicopters appeared on the horizon. Then Coast Guard vessels. Then what looked like every government agency that had ever dealt with unusual situations. They secured the area, set up a perimeter, and very politely asked Jake and Kesra to come with them. Kesra's injuries needed real medical attention. The human doctors at the military facility didn't know what they were doing at first. How do you treat an alien with bioluminescent spots and crystalline eyes? But Kesra's suit had medical data, and soon human physicians were working alongside instructions from Felidae medical databases that had been transmitted during the battle. It was improvised and chaotic, but somehow it worked. Jake sat in the waiting room for 6 hours, drinking terrible government coffee and giving the same statement to 8 different officials. 3 days later, everything changed again. Jake was pulled out of his temporary housing at dawn. They told him to shower and put on clean clothes, but he insisted on wearing his research jacket. It was stained with salt and blood and alien fluids, but it felt right somehow. This had started with him as a marine biologist on his boat. He wanted to finish it the same way. They brought him to a conference room that had been assembled in record time. Banks of computers lined the walls. Technicians rushed around making adjustments. In the center of the room sat a massive screen, currently displaying a symbol Jake didn't recognize. Kesra was already there, her wounds bandaged but healing. She stood straighter now, more official. She wore a new suit provided by her people, deep blue with silver markings that Jake assumed meant something important. "They are ready to speak with us," Kesra said. "The Galactic Council. This is unprecedented. They never contact new species directly like this." "Should I be nervous?" Jake asked. "Terrified would be more appropriate," Kesra replied, but her spots pulsed with what might have been amusement. The screen activated. Jake found himself looking at what appeared to be a massive chamber, curved and vast, filled with beings from a dozen different species. Some resembled animals from Earth. Others were so alien that Jake's brain struggled to process their forms. There were insectoid creatures with too many limbs. Beings made of what looked like living crystal. Something that resembled a tree with eyes. And floating in the center was the speaker. It did look like a jellyfish, translucent and graceful, with long tendrils that glowed with soft light. But it was massive, easily 20 feet across, and there was an intelligence in its movement that made Jake's skin prickle. When it spoke, the voice came through translated, but somehow Jake could hear the weight behind it. This was a being that had seen empires rise and fall, that had made decisions affecting billions of lives. "Jake Foster of Earth," the speaker said. Jake noticed that every other being in that chamber was watching him. "Your species has protected the architect legacy without understanding its full value. You risked your life, your world, for genetic samples you knew nothing about. We must understand. Why?" Jake thought about that question. He thought about diving into the water without hesitation. About choosing to help before asking questions. About standing his ground when threatened. He could give them a complicated answer about human values and moral philosophy. Instead he just shrugged. Someone needed help. Seemed like the right thing to do. The chamber exploded with sound. Every species seemed to be talking at once in languages Jake couldn't understand. The translator struggled to keep up, producing fragments of sentences. "Impossible. No species acts this way. Without calculating advantage? Pure altruism?" The speaker silenced them with a gesture. Its tendrils pulsed and quiet returned. "The Galactic Council has debated for 3 days," the speaker continued. "We offer your world immediate membership in the Council. Full technology sharing. Access to jump gate networks. Medical advances that could extend your lifespans by centuries. Economic opportunities beyond measure. Unlimited resources to accelerate your development." Jake heard people behind him in the conference room gasp. This was everything humanity had dreamed of. First contact leading to instant integration into a galactic civilization. It was more than generous. It was unprecedented. "That's very generous," Jake said carefully. He could feel every eye in both rooms on him. "But I have a different request." The speaker's form shimmered. "You would refuse this offer?" "Not refuse. But I'd like to suggest something else." Jake took a breath. This was it. Make Earth the official stewards of the Architect Genetic Repository. Those 12 embryos. Keep them here, under our protection. And make it a rule that this knowledge gets shared freely with any species that asks for it. No monopolies. No one faction controlling it. Just available to everyone. Dead silence filled both rooms. Jake pressed on. "You offered us technology and resources as a reward. But this isn't about rewards. It's about responsibility. You said the architects gave the galaxy jump gates as a gift. Well, let us honor that gift by making sure their legacy stays free. No strings attached. No political games. Just knowledge available to anyone who needs it. The council chamber erupted again. This time the debate was fiercer, louder. Jake couldn't make out specific words through the translator, but he got the sense that he'd said something either incredibly wise or incredibly stupid. Kestra stepped forward then. Her spots pulsed brightly, commanding attention. When she spoke, her voice carried authority that surprised Jake. "This is humanity," she said to the council. "I have seen them with my own eyes." Jake Foster dove into dark waters to save a stranger. He did not ask what species I was. Did not calculate whether helping me would benefit him. He simply helped. Then, when faced with ships that could destroy his world, he stood his ground. Not for glory. Not for power. But to protect principles he believed in. She gestured to Jake, and there was something like pride in the movement. "Your species fight impossible battles. You face enemies you cannot defeat. And you win anyway through creativity and courage and sheer stubborn refusal to surrender. You choose responsibility over reward every time." The speaker watched them both for a long moment. Its tendrils shifted colors, flowing through shades Jake had no names for. "Jake Foster," it said finally. "Your request is granted. Let it be recorded and known across all civilized worlds. Earth and humanity are named stewards of the architect legacy. The genetic repository shall remain under your protection. And the knowledge contained within shall be shared freely with any species that requests it. No monopolies. No control. The gift of the architects remains a gift." The chamber behind the speaker erupted in what might have been applause or might have been outrage. Jake couldn't tell. But the speaker's decision was final. The transmission ended. The screen went dark. Jake stood in the sudden silence of the conference room, trying to process what had just happened. "You just turned down unlimited technology and resources," someone behind him said. It was Patricia, his government contact, looking at him with an expression somewhere between respect and disbelief. "Yeah," Jake said. "But we got something better." "What's that?" "Trust. Responsibility. A chance to prove that humanity isn't just another faction looking for advantage." Jake smiled. "Besides, I figured we'd rather earn our place in the galaxy than have it handed to us." Kesra approached him, her crystalline eyes bright. "I am staying," she announced, "as ambassador to your world. My people have approved. The council has approved. Someone needs to tell them the full story about humanity. About the marine biologist who saved a drowning alien. About the man who turned pale when he understood what he was protecting. Not from fear, but from understanding the weight of holding trillions of lives in his hands." "You're going to make me sound way more heroic than I actually am," Jake protested. "I am going to tell them the truth," Kesra replied. "Which is more powerful than any fiction." Later, Jake stood on a beach near the military facility looking out at the Pacific. His boat was still out there somewhere, probably being studied by every scientist who could get security clearance. Above him, the stars were coming out. The same stars he'd looked at his whole life. Except now he knew. Now everyone knew. They weren't alone. The galaxy was full of life and conflict and wonder and danger. Tomorrow would bring changes. Ambassadors and treaties and humanity's first steps into a larger universe. There would be challenges and opportunities and probably a lot of bureaucracy. But tonight Jake just watched the waves roll in. The same waves that had been rolling for billions of years. The same ocean he'd spent his life studying. Some things didn't change, no matter how much the universe expanded around them. Kesra joined him on the beach, her spots providing soft light in the gathering darkness. "What happens now?" Jake asked. "Now the galaxy learns about humanity," Kesra said. "And humanity learns about the galaxy. It will be complicated. Sometimes difficult. But I believe your species will do well." She paused. "You have something rare, Jake Foster. Your people help first and ask questions later. You fight for principles, not profit. You choose to do the right thing even when it is hard." Jake thought about that. About all the times throughout human history when people had made that same choice. Standing up to tyrants. Protecting the vulnerable. Choosing what was right over what was easy. "I guess we'll try not to mess it up," he said. Above them, a shooting star streaked across the sky. Except Jake knew now that it might not be a shooting star at all. It might be a ship. A person. A story waiting to happen. The galaxy was waiting. But Jake Foster, marine biologist and accidental hero, was in no rush. Tomorrow he'd probably go back to his boat, fix his coffee maker and check his marine sensors. Just another day of being human. And really, when you thought about it, that was more than enough.